He Fell in Love with His Wife by Edward Payson Rowe. Chapter 6. A Marriage. In a quiet side street of the market town in which Mr. Holcroft was accustomed to dispose of his farm produce was a 3-story tenement house. A family occupied each floor, those dwelling in the first 2 stories being plain, respectable people of the mechanic class. The rooms in the 3rd story were, of course, the cheapest, but even from the street might be seen evidences that more money had been spent upon them than could have been saved in rent. Lace curtains were looped aside from the windows, through which were caught glimpses of flowers that must have come from a greenhouse. We have only to enter these apartments to find that the suggestion of refined taste is amply fulfilled. While nothing is costly, there is a touch of grace, a hint of beauty in everything permitting simple adornment. The mistress of these rooms is not satisfied with neatness and order merely. It is her instinct to add something to please the eye, a need essential to her, yet too often conspicuously absent in rented quarters of a similar character. It is remarkable to what a degree people's abodes are a reflex of themselves. Mrs. Alida Ostrom had been brought to these rooms as a happy bride but a few months since. They were then bare and not very clean. Her husband had seemed bent on indulging her so far as his limited means permitted. He had declared that his income was so modest that he could afford nothing better than these cheap rooms in an obscure street. But she had been abundantly content, for she had known even the extremity of poverty. Alida Ostrom had passed beyond the period of girlhood, with its superficial desires and ambitions. When her husband first met her, she was a woman of 30, and had been chastened by deep sorrows and some bitter experiences. Years before, she and her mother had come to this town from a New England city in the hope of bettering their circumstances. They had no weapons other than their needles with which to fight life's battles, but they were industrious and frugal, characteristic traits which won the confidence of the shopkeepers for whom they worked. All went as well, perhaps, as they could expect for 2 or 3 years, their secluded lives passing uneventfully and, to a certain extent, happily. They had time to read some good books obtained at a public library. They enjoyed an occasional holiday in the country, and they went to church twice every Sunday when it was not stormy. The mother usually dozed in the obscure seat near the door which they occupied, for she was getting old, and the toil of the long week wearied her. Alida, on the contrary, was closely attentive. Her mind seemed to crave all the sustenance it could get from every source, and her reverential manner indicated that the hopes were inspired by her faith were dear and cherished. Although they lived such quiet lives and kept themselves apart from their neighbors, there was no mystery about them which awakened surmises. "They've seen better days," was the common remark when they were spoken of, and this was true. While they had no desire to be social with the people among whom they lived, they did not awaken prejudices by the assertion of superiority. Indeed, it was seen that the 2 women had all they could do to earn their livelihood, and they were left to do this in peace. When Alida Armstrong, for that was her maiden name, carried her own and her mother's work to and from the shops, she often encountered admiring glances. She was not exactly pretty, but had the good, refined face which is more often attractive than the merely pretty one, and she possessed a trim, rounded figure which she knew how to clothe with taste from the simplest and most inexpensive materials. Nor did she seek to dress above her station. When passing along the street, any discerning person would recognize that she was a working girl, only the superficial would look upon her as a commonplace girl. There was nothing in her modest air and graceful, elastic carriage which suggested the thought to many observers, "She has seen better days." The memory of these days, which had promised immunity from wearing toil, anxiety, and poverty, was a barrier between the 2 women and their present world. Death had bereft them of husband, father, and such property as he had left had been lost in a bad investment. Learning that they were almost penniless, they had patiently set about earning honest bread. This they had succeeded in doing as long as the mother kept her usual health. But the infirmities of age were creeping upon her. One winter she took a heavy cold and was very ill. She rallied only temporarily in the milder days of spring. In the summer's heat, her strength failed and she died. During her mother's long illness, 𝙼𝚊𝚅 was devotion itself. The strain upon her was severe enough, for she not only had to earn food for both, but there were also doctors' bills, medicines, and delicacies to pay for. The poor girl grew thin from work by day, watching by night, and from fear and anxiety at all times. Their scanty savings were exhausted. Articles were sold from their rooms. The few precious heirlooms of silver and china were disposed of. 𝙼𝚅𝚅 even denied herself the food she needed, rather than ask for help or permit her mother to want for anything which ministered to their vain hopes of renewed health. What she should have done she scarcely knew, had not an unexpected friend interested himself in her behalf. In one of the men's clothing stores was a cutter from whom she obtained work. Soon after he appeared in this shop, he began to manifest signs of interest in her. He was about her own age, he had a good trade, and she often wondered why he appeared so reticent and moody, as compared with others in similar positions. But he always spoke kindly to her, and when her mother's illness first developed, he showed all the leniency permitted to him in regard to her work. His apparent sympathy, and the need of explaining why she was not able to finish her tasks as promptly as usual, led her gradually to reveal to him the sad struggle in which she was engaged. He promised to intercede in her behalf with their mutual employers, and asked if he might come to see her mother. Recognizing how dependent she was upon this man's goodwill, and seeing nothing in his conduct but kindness and sympathy, she consented. His course and his words confirmed all her good impressions, and awakened on her side corresponding sympathy united with a lively gratitude. He told her that he also was a stranger in the town, that he had but few acquaintances and no friends, that he had lost relatives and was in no need to go about like other young men. His manner was marked apparently by nothing more than interest and a wish to help her, and was untinged by gallantry. So they gradually became good friends. When he called Sunday afternoons, the mother looked at him wistfully, in the hope that her daughter would not be left without a protector. At last the poor woman died, and 𝙼𝚅𝚅 was in sore distress, for she had no means with which to bury her. Ostrom came and said in the kindest tones, "You must let me lend you what you need, and you can pay me back with interest if you wish. You won't be under any obligation, for I have money lying idle in the bank. When you have only yourself to support, it will not take you long to earn the sum." There seemed nothing else for her to do, and so it was arranged. With tear-blinded eyes she made her simple mourning, and within a week after her mother's death was at work again, eager to repay her debt. He urged her not to hasten, to take all the rest she could while the hot weather lasted, and few evenings passed that he did not come to take her out for a walk through the quieter streets. By this time he had won her confidence completely, and her heart overflowed with gratitude. Of course she was not so unsophisticated as not to know whither all his attention was tending, but it was a great relief to her mind that his courtship was so quiet and undemonstrative. Her heart was sore and grief-stricken, and she was not conscious of any other feeling toward him than the deepest gratitude and wish to make such a return as was within her power. He was apparently very frank in regard to his past life, and nothing was said which excited her suspicions. Indeed, she felt that it would be disloyalty to think of questioning or surmising evil of the one who had proved himself so true a friend in her sore need. She was therefore somewhat prepared for the words he spoke, one warm September day, as they sat together in a little shaded park. "𝙼𝚅𝚅," he said a little nervously, "we are both strangers and live alone in this world, but surely we are no longer strangers to each other. Let us go quietly to some minister and be married. That is the best way for you to pay your debt and keep me always in debt to you." She was silent a moment, then faltered, "I'd rather pay all my debt first." "What debt can there be between husband and wife? Come now, let us look at the matter sensibly. I don't want to frighten you. Things will go on much the same. We can take quiet rooms. I will bring work to you instead of your having to go after it. It's nobody's business but our own. We have not a circle of relations to consult or invite. We can go to some parsonage. The minister's family will be the witnesses. Then I'll leave you at your room as usual, and no one will be the wiser any till I've found a place where we can go to housekeeping. That won't be long, I can tell you." He placed the matter in such a simple, natural light that she did not know how to refuse. "Perhaps I do not love you as much as you ought to be loved, and deserve to be in view of all your kindness," she tried to explain. "I feel I ought to be very truthful and not deceive you in the least, as I know you would not deceive me." So strong a shiver passed through his frame that she exclaimed, "You are taking cold, or you don't feel well." "Oh, it is nothing," he said hastily. "Only the night air, and then a fellow always feels nervous, I suppose, when he is asking for something on which his happiness depends. I am satisfied with such feeling and goodwill as you have for me, and will only be too glad to get you as you are. Come, before it's too late in the evening." "Is your heart bent on this, after what I have said, Wilson?" Yes, yes, indeed," clasping her hand and drawing her to her feet. "It would seem very ungrateful in me to refuse after all you have done for me and Mother. If you think it's right and best, will you go to the minister whose church I attended and who came to see Mother?" "Certainly, anyone you like," and he put her hand on his arm and led her away. The clergyman listened sympathetically to her brief history of Ostrom's kindness, then performed a simple ceremony, which his wife and daughters witnessed. As they were about to depart, he said, "I will send you a certificate." "Don't trouble yourself to do that," said the groom. "I'll call for it some evening soon." Never had she seen Ostrom in such gay spirits as on their return, and womanlike she was happy chiefly because she felt she had made him happy. She also felt a glad sense of security. Her mother's dying wish had been fulfilled. She now had a protector, and would soon have a home instead of a boarding place among strangers. Her husband speedily found the rooms to which the reader has been introduced. The street on which they were located was no thoroughfare. Its farther end was closed by a fence, and beyond were fields. With the exception of those who dwelt upon it or had business with the residents, few people came thither. To this locality Ostrom brought his bride, and selected rooms whose windows were above those of the surrounding houses. So far from regretting this isolation and remoteness from the central life of the town, Alida's feelings sanctioned his choice. The sense of possessing security and a refuge was increased, and it was natural for her to set about making the rooms homelike as it was to breathe. Her husband appeared to have exhausted his tendencies toward close economy in the choice of apartments, and she was given more money than she desired with which to furnish and decorate. He said, "Fix everything up to suit your mind, and I'll be satisfied." This she did with such skill, taste, and good management that she returned a large portion of the sum he had given her, whereupon he laughingly remarked that she had already saved him more than she owed. He seemed disinclined to accompany her in the selection of her simple outfit, but professed himself so pleased with her choice of everything that she was gratified and happy in the thought of relieving him from trouble. Thus their married life began under what appeared to her the most promising and congenial circumstances. She soon insisted on having work again, and her busy fingers did much to increase his income. Alida was not an exacting woman, and recognized from the beginning that her husband would naturally have peculiar ways of his own. Unlike Mrs. Mumpson, she never expatiated on adaptation, but Ostrom soon learned, with much inward relief, that his wife would accept unquestioningly what appeared to be his habits and preferences. He went early to his place of work, taking the nice little lunch which she prepared, and returned to the dusk of the evening, when he always found a warm dinner in readiness. After this he was ready enough to walk with her, but as before chose the least frequented streets. Places of amusement and resort seemed distasteful. On Sundays he enjoyed a ramble in the country as long as the season permitted, and then showed a great disinclination to leave the fireside. For a time he went with her in the evening to church, but gradually persuaded her to remain at home and read or talk to him. His wife felt that she had little cause to complain of his quiet ways and methodical habits. He had exhibited them before marriage, and they were conducive to her absolute sense of proprietorship in him, an assurance so dear to a woman's heart. The pleasures of his home and her society appeared to be all that he craved. At times she had wondered a little at a certain air of apprehensiveness in his manner when steps were heard upon the stairs, but as the quiet days and weeks passed, such manifestations of nervousness ceased. Occasionally he would start violently and mutter strange words in his sleep, but nothing disturbed the growing sense of security and satisfaction in Alida's heart. The charm of a regular, quiet life grows upon one who has a nature fitted for it, and this was true to an unusual degree of Alida Ostrom. Her content was increased by the fact that her husband was able each month to deposit a goodly portion of their united earnings in a savings bank. Every day, every week, was so like the preceding ones that it seemed as if their happy life might go on forever. She was gladly conscious that there was more than gratitude and goodwill in her heart. She now cherished a deep affection for her husband, and felt that he had become essential to her life. "Oh, how happy Mother would be if she knew how safe and protected I am," she murmured one March evening, as she was preparing her husband's dinner. Leaving me alone in the world was far worse to her than dying. At that very moment, a gaunt-looking woman, with a child in her arms, stood in the twilight on the opposite side of the street, looking up at the windows.